Hey, this is Joe. The thing about Michael is, he's always been there. Middle school awkwardness, mismatched braces, and all. We were the kids no one wanted for dodgeball, the ones huddled in the library at lunch pretending we didn't care. I remember the first time he spoke to me. He asked if I wanted to join his Minecraft server. I said no. But the next day, I caved. We built an empire in that pixelated world, carving out something bigger than ourselves. Somehow, that turned into real friendship. By high school, we were inseparable, Joe and Michael, the perpetual duo. When college came around, I stayed on the East Coast while he packed his bags for the West. It could have been the end of things, but it wasn't. Weekly video calls filled the gap, our voices bouncing through pixelated screens, still building, this time in virtual battlefields and blocky dungeons. Life happened in those calls: job rejections, existential crises, late-night rants over terrible dorm food. He talked me through my dad's heart surgery, and I gave him pep talks before his finals. The distance didn't dilute us. If anything, it fortified us. Michael is the one who convinced me to go to that housewarming party. I wasn't going to, crowds and I don't mix. But he said, "You're 25. You can't live your life dodging people forever. And who knows, maybe you'll meet someone." That someone turned out to be Mia. She stood by the kitchen, cradling a red plastic cup, laughing at something I couldn't hear. A quiet magnetism surrounded her, not flashy, not loud, but impossible to ignore. I hesitated too long, nerves bubbling up like soda fizz. Michael nudged me with his elbow. "Go talk to her. Worst case, you bomb. Best case." He left the sentence hanging, smirking like he'd already decided which way it would go. My approach was clumsy. I stammered something about the music playing in the background, an obscure indie band I half recognized but couldn't name. She smiled, told me it was Little Comets, and launched into a story about seeing them live in a cramped dive bar. We found ourselves at a coffee shop the next morning, still riding the wave of effortless conversation. Coffee turned into dinner, and by the week's end, it felt like I'd known her for years. Mia wasn't like anyone I'd met. She photographed empty streets at sunrise and listened to records on an old turntable she'd rescued from her grandmother's attic. Her laughter was unrestrained, breaking out in crescendos that made strangers glance over, curious. We discovered a shared love for wandering the city without a plan, finding hole-in-the-wall bookstores and murals hidden in alleys. Michael was ecstatic when I told him. "I knew you had it in you," he said during one of our video calls, his face lit up like he'd won a bet. He demanded updates after every date, dissecting every detail like a coach analyzing game footage. He joked about being my unofficial wingman, but I could tell he was genuinely happy for me. Our bond remained unshaken even as my life shifted with Mia in the picture. I expected some jealousy, maybe a bit of distance, but Michael wasn't like that. He celebrated our milestones, sometimes more enthusiastically than I did. When I showed him the photos Mia had taken of me, goofy, candid shots from a day at the park, he said, "She gets you, man. You can see it." I didn't realize how much his approval mattered until that moment. Looking back, those early days with Mia and Michael were the foundation, something solid to stand on. They both believed in me in their own ways, and I carried that belief like armor. Life was simple, the kind of simple you don't appreciate until it isn't. It became our thing, the three of us. Every Friday night, without fail, we'd pile into my apartment for our weekly gaming sessions. Mia and Michael, each with their own controller, each with their own competitive streak. It was a mix of chaos and laughter, all of us taking turns killing each other in pixelated wars, but the bond it formed was real. Michael would throw out sarcastic remarks every time Mia beat him, and she'd return fire with a grin, not letting up for a second. I'd sit back and watch, amazed at how seamlessly they clicked. The banter, the camaraderie, it felt like we were all old friends, even though Mia and Michael hadn't known each other long. The games would stretch into the late hours, but the next day, we'd be out again, this time trading the console for hiking boots. Weekends became a ritual. Saturday mornings, bright and early, the three of us on a trail somewhere. Whether it was the local woods or the mountains an hour out of the city, We trekked through landscapes and swapped stories. The deeper into the woods we went, the more the city seemed to slip away. It was just us, breathing in the fresh air, talking about life, about work, dreams, and how we all saw the future. Holiday celebrations turned into big group affairs. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, Mia and Michael, and I, our little chosen family. We'd spend hours in my apartment, cooking together, sharing meals, wrapping gifts. The laughter didn't stop, and even when the kitchen was a mess and the wine glasses were empty, there was something effortless about it all. The holidays felt fuller, brighter, because they weren't just mine or Mia's or Michael's, they were ours. Despite how quickly things progressed, I never once felt out of place with Mia and Michael together. It was the kind of friendship that made sense in its own strange way. She'd text him random song recommendations, and he'd reply with the most obscure facts about the band. They had this connection, this rhythm, like they'd been in sync for years. But there was never anything more than that. At least I never sensed it. There was no tension, no lingering glances. They were just friends, friends who happened to know the same bad jokes and enjoy the same obscure movies. And for that, I was grateful. I was happy, genuinely happy. The way they fit together, Mia's calm energy balancing Michael's sarcasm, it was a good thing. And I had no reason to question it. By 8 months, things started to shift. We were all spending so much time together that it didn't feel right to be apart anymore. Mia moved into my place, an easy decision. Her apartment had always felt temporary, just a place she'd settled into while figuring things out. With me, it was different. There was a sense of permanence between us, something deeper than I expected. The transition was seamless, like a natural extension of what we'd already built. We stayed up late on those nights, assembling furniture, laughing over mismatched sheets, as if the act of putting things together was just as important as the home itself. The plans we started making felt less like tentative ideas and more like solid goals. We talked about the future, not as a distant thought but as something we were actively building. Moving in together meant more than cohabitating. It was the foundation for everything we wanted. There were talks about marriage, about kids, about where we'd live in 5 years. A house in the suburbs? Or would we stay here, in the city, close to the energy we thrived in? We didn't have all the answers, but we had each other. And that seemed like more than enough. Meeting our families was the next big step. Mia met my mom over Sunday brunch, and it was awkward at first. Too much pressure, too many questions about the future. But by the end of the meal, they were laughing over stories about my childhood. Michael's family was different. His sister loved Mia from the moment they met, and we all bonded over board games and cheap wine in his parents' basement. It felt good, natural, really. They all seemed to approve of us, and I found myself hoping that they would, in the same way I hoped Mia's family would. We talked about our careers, Mia's photography, and how she dreamed of eventually opening her own gallery. My job, something I wasn't as passionate about, but it paid the bills. We were supporting each other's goals, even when they didn't perfectly align with our own. I encouraged her to keep shooting, to keep chasing that dream. And she, without hesitation, told me to quit second-guessing myself. We had something rare between us: trust, support, and the shared belief that, together, we could achieve whatever we set out to do. Our routine became familiar: weeknight dinner dates in the park, spontaneous road trips to nowhere in particular, and endless moments of joy between the mundane. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing, running our hands through each other's hair as we sat on the couch or danced to some song that played on the radio. I wasn't worried. Not yet. There was an ease to it all. It was, in every sense, the golden period. It started slow, small things I barely noticed at first. Mia's texts became less frequent, her responses shorter. At first, I brushed it off. She was busy with work, I told myself. But when she started canceling plans, dinner with my family, a weekend getaway we'd been planning for months, I couldn't ignore it. It became a pattern. Every time, she had a reason: late shifts, meetings that ran late, things that didn't add up. Michael wasn't much better. At first, I thought it was just him being busy with work. But when he started pulling away too, canceling game nights, canceling hikes, I felt the shift. We'd been inseparable for so long. Our trio had been a constant, a comfort. Now, suddenly, it was like pulling teeth to get either of them to commit to anything. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. But the absence, the distance, it was undeniable. I started spending more time alone, drowning myself in work, hoping it would clear the fog in my mind. I'd text Michael to meet up, but he'd always have an excuse, something about deadlines or family. Mia was the same. I could see her, but she wasn't really there. She'd laugh, sure, but it felt rehearsed. Empty. One Friday, I tried to organize a movie night. A simple thing, just the three of us. I picked a film we'd all talked about seeing, arranged snacks, and cleared my schedule. But Mia backed out last minute, something about a last-minute shoot for work. Michael didn't even respond. I ended up watching the movie alone, the flickering screen only making the silence feel louder. I started paying attention, the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach growing. Their behavior wasn't coincidental. The excuses were too similar. Too rehearsed. And when I thought I saw the same tired patterns in their eyes, guilt, maybe, or was it something worse? I didn't know how to react. I met Michael at the pub, needing answers. The usual noise of the place didn't comfort me like it used to. He was already there, nursing a beer, his posture stiff as I slid into the booth across from him. I didn't mince words. "What's going on, man?" My voice was low, tight. "Where've you been?" He avoided my gaze, swirling his drink slowly. "Work, Joe. You know how it is." I leaned forward. "It's more than that, Mike. You're not telling me something." The tension between us felt like it could snap at any moment. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders sagging in defeat. "She's not who you think she is." I froze. I couldn't breathe for a second. "What do you mean?" 3 months, he said quietly. "It's been going on for 3 months." My world shifted on its axis. 3 months? What the hell was he talking about? "She's been with me, Joe. We've been seeing each other." My mind struggled to process it. It felt like someone hit pause on everything, freezing the scene around me while I tried to piece together the shards of my reality. The betrayal wasn't just a thought, it was in my face, slapping me harder than I could process. I stood up, my fists clenched, and the shock and anger hit me like a tidal wave. "You've been sleeping with her." While I couldn't finish. It was too much. Michael didn't try to stop me as I stormed out of the pub. I needed to find Mia. I didn't even think, just reacted. I found her at her apartment, standing in the doorway like she was waiting for me. She didn't say a word when I stepped inside. I didn't let her. "How long?" I demanded, voice shaking. "How long, Mia?" Her eyes were wide, like a deer caught in headlights. But there was no apology there. No remorse. "Joe, Don't," I interrupted. "Don't lie to me." She dropped her gaze, and for a moment I could almost feel the weight of her guilt, but it didn't make any of it easier. "It's been going on since before you moved in with me," she whispered. "It wasn't supposed to happen, but it did." The words hit harder than I expected. The truth didn't offer any relief. I couldn't even bring myself to look at her, not after everything. I turned and walked out, the door slamming behind me like an exclamation point on everything that was broken between us. The betrayal was real, and the pain wasn't just from the affair, it was in everything I thought I knew. I couldn't unsee it. And I wasn't sure if I ever could. Mia moved out within a week. She packed her things quietly, as if she were just visiting for a few days. She didn't look back when she left, but neither did I. It was over. 2 years of my life, gone, stripped away by lies and betrayal. Michael wasn't any better. We didn't talk after that night at the pub. No phone calls, no texts, just an unbearable silence between us. I couldn't even bring myself to look at him. The friendship we'd built since middle school, broken. What were we now? Strangers? Enemies? I spent the next few days in a haze. The apartment, once filled with laughter and plans, felt too big now, too quiet. My mind ran in circles. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I avoided our mutual friends, knowing I'd be met with questions, pity, and insincerity. Instead, I buried myself in online forums, connecting with people who didn't know me, who didn't know what I'd lost. It was easier that way, just talking to faceless strangers. They didn't expect anything from me, and they certainly didn't ask why I had to end things with both Mia and Michael. But then there was Emma, Mia's younger sister. I never paid much attention to her, never saw her as more than the quiet girl in the background. But when Mia moved out, Emma reached out. She sent me a text, asking if I was okay. I wasn't, but I wasn't going to admit it to her. We met for coffee one afternoon, and the conversation felt strangely comfortable. I told her the basics, how things ended with Mia, how I was struggling. Emma listened. Really listened. Something about her was different from her sister. There was no judgment in her eyes, no discomfort with my pain. As we talked, I realized how much I was opening up to her, something I hadn't done with anyone else. It wasn't intentional, but it felt good, like a release. A few days later, I met with Emma again, and we spent hours just talking, connecting. We even laughed a little, something I hadn't done in weeks. That evening, something shifted between us. There was a vulnerability I hadn't expected. I hadn't planned it, but I told her everything, the affair, the hurt, the way I felt betrayed by both her sister and Michael. Her reaction wasn't what I anticipated. Emma didn't look surprised, but she didn't defend me either. She was quiet for a long time, her eyes distant, before she spoke. "I always knew something was off with them," she said softly. "But I never wanted to say it." In that moment, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everything Mia had taken from me, from both of us. A few days later, I revealed the details to Mia. I didn't tell her outright, I let Emma tell her, in her own time. The shock in Mia's eyes when she found out wasn't the victory I thought it would be. It was emptier. But I didn't care. What did it matter now? Mia had lost more than just me. She lost her sister, too. And Michael? That relationship? Fractured beyond repair. They couldn't hide from what they'd done, and now they had to live with it. All of it. Michael showed up a week later, standing at my door, his face etched with regret. He tried to speak, but I didn't let him. There was no room for words anymore. His attempts at reconciliation felt hollow, the damage already done. "I never meant for things to go this far," he said, but it was too little, too late. He had crossed a line I couldn't unsee. Mia reached out, too. She called, texted, left messages. She wanted to explain, to tell me how sorry she was, to fix things. But I couldn't hear it. The sincerity in her voice, the regret, it didn't matter. I couldn't forgive her, not after everything she'd taken from me. It wasn't about love anymore. It was about betrayal. And once that trust was shattered, it couldn't be rebuilt. Emma stayed distant. She didn't pick sides, and that was fine with me. I had no right to ask her to. She had her own relationship with Mia, and it wasn't my place to drag her into the wreckage of mine. Still, I couldn't help but feel a strange comfort in her absence. She had shown me a different side of things, someone who wasn't wrapped up in the chaos, someone who could walk away from it all without regret. As the days passed, the weight of the situation started to settle. The satisfaction I'd anticipated, seeing them hurt, seeing them regret their choices, it didn't fill the hole. It wasn't victory. It was just a painful end to something I couldn't change. But there was relief in knowing that they both had to face the consequences of their actions. They couldn't hide from it, and I had done nothing to shield them. Moving forward, I began to find my own closure, not through what I'd done to them, but through what I learned about myself. The experience had cracked open my understanding of trust, of friendship, and of love. I had let myself be vulnerable, and I had paid the price for it. But I also realized that vulnerability wasn't the problem. Trusting the wrong people had been. I focused on my own growth. I took time for myself, for my career, for my passions. I strengthened my boundaries, making sure I never lost sight of who I was again. The lessons about trust and loyalty weren't easy, but they were necessary. I couldn't let anyone manipulate my sense of self anymore. I found peace not in what happened, but in how I handled it. The outcomes weren't what I had hoped for, but they were a reminder of how far I'd come. I had made it through, and I had learned more about the kind of person I wanted to be, and the kind of people I wanted in my life. There was no easy fix for betrayal, no magic moment where everything was right again. But I was moving forward, stronger, clearer. And I knew now that trust wasn't something to give lightly.